What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Trink. Today I'm going to be showing a cool new product I'm going to be releasing here, and this is actually a template system that works to easily make the mortises for the common I-Semble blind shelf hardware kit. And so typically this kit is pretty hard to create the mortises for in a blind shelf because it's two different size mortises stacked on top of each other, and it's actually pretty tricky to pull off. This template system is a 3-in-1 system that'll cut the two mortises and line up your hole for the post, and I think you're going to enjoy it. It's going to make your life a lot easier if you're using this particular hardware. So let's go ahead and take a look at the product. Okay, so first I want to give a little background about what this template kit is for. So if you go into any local Rockler or Woodcraft, even online, what you're going to see commonly for blind shelf hardware is this I-Semble hardware. And it's a decent hardware kit, but what you can see here from the completed section, you actually have to recess these two plates and those panhead screws into the back of your shelf for the shelf to actually sit flat against the wall. And for the common person going to buy and try themselves out at blind shelves, they might not realize that this is actually somewhat difficult to do without the right procedure or the right tools. And so the goal of this template system is to allow anybody with a common router to be able to do a really professional job with this. And I'll show you how that works. But essentially we have an outer bracket here that has this thick outer bracket. We have the inner one which sits below it, this bracket here. And what we need is two appropriately sized mortises to fit that and give us a nice snug fit, which is going to strengthen the shelf. Finally, as you can see, these panhead screws sit proud on the back of the hardware. Those also need to be recessed into the shelf for this entire thing to work. So it's a somewhat complicated system to actually use. It's deceivingly difficult to use properly, but this template system is going to change that, so I'm excited to show you guys. Okay, so taking apart into the three separate pieces here, we've got the first plate here, which is going to be what cuts the first mortise for the larger, wider bracket. And what we see here is we've got actually a center line that runs down both the front and the back, which will just help us line up where the mortise is actually going to go on the back of the shelf. We, of course, have the template here, which is going to be what fits that wider bracket, as well as just being, this extra wide form allows us to make these mortises on very thick brackets or very thick shelves. And if we need it to go on narrower shelves, all we can do is just put a couple pieces of wood here to shim it, which I'll show you later. The second piece here will do the second mortise for the shorter, deeper bracket. We can see these two tabs, which will actually press fit in and line this template up. As well as on here, I don't know if you can pick it up on camera, but it says mortise 1 depth. This is going to be the actual thickness we use to set the plunge router for the first mortise. Finally, we have the third and final piece here, which is going to be what lines up the various holes that we drill. And again, I don't know how well it shows up on camera, but this says mortise 2 depth. And again, this thickness is going to be what we use to set up the plunge router for the second mortise. So everything's very easy to use, it's super user friendly, and it's going to give you a professional result. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how you implement the template system. Okay, so what tools are you going to need to get the job done here? Well, essentially all you're going to need is a drill, of course, to drill the hole, but specifically we're going to need some sort of plunge router because that's how we're going to use the template system. With that plunge router, you're going to need a flush trim bit, specifically what's called a template bit, where the bearing actually rides above the cutter head. And you can get this at any local woodworking store. You just need to make sure that it's a somewhat small template bit with a 1/4 inch radius bearing or something smaller, so that we can get the curves of the template. But other than that, that's all you need. And if you don't have a router and you want to do this, well, a router is a super handy tool to have around the shop, or even for the common DIYers. So it's a good tool worth investing in. So with that, let's go ahead and use the system. Okay, so setting up this template system is really pretty easy. On your shelf, first thing you're going to do is mark where this is actually going to be going. And so I'm just going to use a square here to mark a line, a center line both on the face and on the top edge. And that's what we're going to use as a reference line for the template. Now you can see in this case here, I can actually use the center line on the template to line up where this goes, which makes it really easy to line this up. So you can see here, it's nice and centered. Now what we're going to do is use some clamps to attach this securely. I like to use these extra wide Bessie clamps because it just makes sure that the top ridge of the clamp is out of the way of the base of the router. And again, these clamps are really useful to have. Now, if we actually look at where the template sits right now, we can see that the mortise is a little bit off center with the shelf. And so in this case, what I'm going to do is just take a thin piece of scrap, and what we can actually do is just put that under the template to shift that mortise closer to the center. Super easy fix, and that's what makes this really versatile. And then we're going to go ahead and clamp this on. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is actually use this second piece of the template itself, which says mortise 1 depth, to actually set the depth on the plunge router. This is super easy to do. All we're going to do is set the router up on the piece here, and then we're going to drop the router until it's hitting just the top of the wood, just like that, so it contacts. Then we're going to use the plunge stop itself to just lift this up and drop that underneath. Just press down to make sure it's nice and secure. Then I'm going to tighten the knob, and then just like that, we've got it set for the first mortise. So let's go ahead and cut this mortise. I do recommend you do it in 2 passes just to reduce the intensity of the cut. That's always a good idea when using a router, but it's super easy. You're going to see how quick it is to do this. Okay, so we can see we've got a super clean first mortise here, and if I take the first piece of the bracket, you can see that this here just nicely presses into that. You can see it's really flush with the top, really looks good, and it's a nice tight fit, which is going to just help the strength of the shelf overall. So with that, we can pop this out and do the second mortise. So the second piece here has these 2 tabs, which are going to index in the mortise we just made. So what I'm going to do is just line this up and start pressing it in. You'll probably have to give it a few smacks just to get it fully seated. That's intentional because we want this to be a nice tight fit. And you can see just like that, this is in place and we're ready to go. So same way as we did with the first mortise, what we're going to do is just set the depth stop here. So first I'm going to plunge the router down just until it makes contact with the wood here. Okay, and then I'm going to take the third piece of the system, which is labeled mortise 2 reference, and we're just going to set the depth, reset the depth here, just like that. Press down and tighten that, and just like that, we're good to go to make the next mortise. Okay, you can see now we can just go ahead and wedge this template off. Again, it's a pretty tight fit, which is intentional because you don't want this template moving around while you're using the router. So just like that, we can take it off, just clear out a bit of the dust. And now you can see you've got this clean inner mortise, which is slightly less wide than the outer mortise. And what we'll see is that we can drop this plate in, and that fits snugly in there, and it sits below the surface, which means the 2 brackets together are going to sit perfectly flush. So let's go ahead and show how you drill the post out. Okay, so the third and final template then can go into the first mortise we made, and this just has 3 holes here in order to accurately use a brad point bit just to perfectly center where our holes need to go. Now, like I said, the main hole is a 9/16 hole, and so we can take a 9/16 brad point bit, brad point having this fine tip, and if we insert this down here, I can just give it a push, and that'll mark the center point there. And then for those pan head screws that I showed that stick proud, we're going to use a 1/2" bit here. And again, I'm just going to press that in to make a point and press it in to make a point here. And then when we take this template out, we'll have 3 accurate holes to drill. So looking inside the mortise here, you can see that we've got 3 center marks there, which perfectly mark where we need to go ahead and drill the relief holes. Now, while you can use a drill guide, and it actually is recommended to help you make a really accurate straight hole, I'm just going to show you can do this by hand if you're just careful with your drilling and make sure to stay perpendicular to the face. And we got to drill long enough to fit this entire post in, so let's just go ahead and do that. Okay, so with the main post drilled out here, all I'm going to do is just use this 1/2" bit then to make a counter bore in order to recess the head of those pan head screws. And to do that, I'm just going to take the 1/2" bit, And with that, we can just go ahead and assemble the hardware and put it into the mortise. I just keep the pan head screws a little bit loose because there's a little bit of movement here on the plates, and so you just want to make sure they align with the mortise. So leave them slightly loose. We're going to put them in, then pull it out, tighten it up, and we'll be good to go, and we'll wrap this up. And you can see then, just like that, we've got this perfectly fitting in. It's super strong because it's a nice snug fit in those mortises. And to be honest, I don't even use the screws that go into these side slots. I think they're plenty strong as is. And so yeah, it's a really professional look. They fit great, and it's going to really help you make these floating shelves a lot easier and better. All right, guys, thanks for watching the video. That's going to wrap it up for today. I think that this is a really useful template system that if you do a lot of these floating shelves and if you use the I-Semble hardware, that you're going to really find this helpful, and you're going to get a really good result, and it's going to be a lot less frustrating. So that's going to be it for today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for future projects and builds, and with that, we'll see you next time.